Let's get started with the modeling. I'm going to eyeball these dimensions. Make sure that your camera is facing the z-axis, which is the blue axis. If you put your right hand up and make the letter L with your palm facing you, your index will be the y-axis, your thumb will be the x-axis. If you take your middle finger and point it at yourself, that's the z-axis. RGB, XYZ. And when you build things, you always want to be facing that z-axis. So let's go ahead and click on our polycube and just go ahead and draw out the broad dimensions of this. I'm going to zero my x and z axes, not my y. Not just yet, so I'll type in 0, tab, 0. Now to set these dimensions, I'm going to work to something a little bit more even because it'll give me a sense of how I can create symmetry in this object. So instead of something as very specific like 10.301, which is what I have, I'm just going to type in 10. The height, I'll make it 10 for now. I'll put it at 11, make it a little bit taller. I'll keep it at 4 for now. We can always adjust that. So if I know the height is 11, then if I put the translate y at 5.5, that'll be right on the ground. Again, you can move this pivot down to here. You can hold D as in dog, and then hold V to snap the points. And then if you're holding both of them, D and V, you can snap it, and it snaps down right in the middle because you're snapping to these points down here. It's a good way to snap a pivot point to the bottom of an object that you can then snap along the grid, which is the X key. So you can snap it all along the grid. Now once I have this polycube created and I've got these inputs in place, it's easy to think that the first thing that I need to do is just to take all these faces and select them, to shift and right click, select the extrude face tool, turn keep faces together off, and then to start creating offsets. That's kind of, that might be your first thought based off of any use of the extrude tool. The problem with that is if I'm trying to make this out of a single object, you see these vertical legs? They're posts that become the legs, the feet. We don't have any topology down here. And that's not going to be really useful. We could cut it in here afterwards, but that's just going to be a bit of a hassle. So what I would do first is I just undid all those commands, and make sure that when you undo an extrude command, I can illustrate this really quick. When you extrude something, if you press Z once to undo it, you haven't undone the actual tool. So there are actually 4 flat faces that have 0 thickness. You'll notice in the inputs, there's also the poly extrude tool. There's still an extrusion there, right? We haven't undone the actual extrusion. So you're going to have additional topology stacked up on top of itself, and that's really poor modeling. So this is something, it's a common error, and that's why I'm bringing it up now. So when you undo the extrude face tool, don't just type in Z once, type in Z twice, and look at your inputs. Always look in your channel box and make sure that you get back to that base level. If you ever delete your construction history, just make sure you get back to that base level. So we're going to use symmetry for this object, and we're going to insert edge loops so that we can create the topology for these legs instead of just going ahead and extruding the faces and creating the panels. So to do that, I need to put some edge loops here, here, and here, and here. But I need an edge loop in the middle to act as a guide. So what I'm going to do is shift and right click, insert edge loop tool with my object selected, go to my tool settings. Let's reset that. In the settings section, I'm going to choose multiple edge loops. Use the equal multiplier should be checked, but it's not going to be multiple edge loops, it's just going to be one. And what that guarantees is when I click anywhere on the object, right along here, perpendicular to it, it's going to drop an edge loop right in the middle of it. Go back into object mode. In my tool settings menu, can open up the symmetry settings. I can use the topology option. And it's looking for an edge, and that's why I created that center edge. So now I click on it, and if you select anything, I'm going to select faces because we've been working in faces. You'll notice that anything on either side to that, it gives us its counterpart on the other side. Very useful. So now I'm going to go into edges. Does the same thing. I'm going to select this edge. I'm going to shift and right click. Go to Insert Edge Loop Tool. I'm going to turn off. Let's reset this tool. And this is just going to be a freeform type of insertion. And you can use the grid if you want to help you, or you can just eyeball this. You can go ahead and add that in. And then you can go, insert that in, you've got one on the other side. Now we want an edge loop on this side and this side as well. Alright, well, let's alter it so we can get our symmetry. I'm going to go into here, open up my symmetry settings. Let's reset it so that it's turned off. I'm going to shift and right click on the object, insert another edge loop tool. Use that multiple edge loops, set it to 1. Pops it right in the middle. Now we've got that reference that we can use. Go back into object mode, F8. Open up the symmetry settings. Choose topology, pick that edge. And now we have it oriented this way. Now I can select that edge, shift and right click, insert the edge loop. Reset this tool, and I'm just using about one of those grid positions to act as the reference for it. So now I've got this base topology in position. And that's important because just going through there and extruding things as you want sometimes can work, but sometimes it's not that useful because we don't think about the objects that need to come out this way or this way, in which case we can select those, and with the symmetry that's in position we can now bring those out. We can bounce out to our 4 views. Just move this up a little bit. Now you might be looking at it and going like, do we need all that topology? Do we need all of that stuff? Well, this you really don't. We just needed it as a source. This is an edge loop, and you can double click on it, and we can go back into our symmetry and just reset that. It's always usually good when you're done with it to reset it. You don't need it. But you can shift and right click on that edge and delete it. Now, why can't I just hit delete on my keyboard? Well, I want to show you something. Hit delete on your keyboard. Now go to vertices. You've got a bunch of vertices there. This is what's called an isolated vertex. It's also what's called a floating vertex. And floating to me is a more apt term for it, because for a vertex to be valid in 3D modeling, it needs to be connected to at least 3 edges. If it's not, it's considered floating. And that's not really useful, because if you start moving this around, doesn't have that third edge to connect to it, because again, a triangle is the fundamental unit of polygonal modeling, because a triangle, any point can be moved, any vertex, and it still exists on a single plane. Whereas this, what plane is this face on now? It's on here, and it's on here, and ooh, that's bad, right? And you'll have times when you're modeling and you're really, moving through these tools, and you'll see your topology looking like this. And it might be because you have an isolated or a floating vertex like this. What I would recommend, the first thing to do is to back out using your undo tools and see if you can get to the point where you have that edge loop there, and then with edges selected, shift and right click and just delete the edge, because that will delete the edge and any of those vertices. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to insert a couple edge loops on the top and the bottom. Not going to use symmetry, I'm just going to eyeball these. Insert an edge loop, go to your tool settings, reset it. It should give you an arbitrary, just wherever you drag it to. And then you can click and hold. And this one is a little bit different up here on the top than it is here. I'm going to keep it uniform for now. Again, we're just eyeballing this. I'm not interested in absolute precision for things. So now you have kind of the broad strokes in place for the creation of all of those inset panels as well as the doors. Looks a little skinny maybe. So how do we get to making that a little bit thicker? I just don't want to do this. Go to scale and do that because it's going to scale the distances of all these things. It's going to make my legs, I like the thickness of the legs, I just need this space in here to be a little bit wider. Well, this is where symmetry can help us again. You can go into a side view, make sure you go to your tool settings with your object selected, go to symmetry. Let's try World Z. Can select one side of them, and then I can just move it. We're not scaling at this point, we're just moving. I can bounce out and sort of look at that. I kind of like that better. It has a little bit more body to it. We can see the form on this side as well as this side. You'll notice that I keep my camera very often matching the image plane, but also I keep it at a 3/4 angle, and that allows me to see the dimensional form of it. I see a little bit of the side, a little bit of the front. I'm not keeping it like this all the time. I'm not keeping it like this all the time. That's what these views are for. And those help me, just get this in place. You'll notice that the image plane is in these cameras right now. If you want to get it out of there, just go ahead and select it. Control and A, and that opens the attributes for it. This is a menu where we can set all sorts of individual attributes. But we can just set this display option under this main image plane attributes submenu to looking through the camera. I created it in the perspective viewport, and now it's only showing through the perspective viewport. Image planes are tied to cameras, and when you create them, it'll create it through all of your cameras, and you have to specify, no, I just want it in this camera. I've done plenty of work on this thing, and I'd like to save it out, so I'm going to go to File, Save Scene As, and I've already saved a version of this. I've just called this M3 Cupboard_work1, CUPBOARD. If you have your project correctly set, it will go directly to the Scenes folder. I've created a subfolder for all of the different module work, and you can do that too. You can create M1, M2, M3, etc., etc. So now we're ready to start using the Extrude tool to create some of these insets.